Welcome to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 161 of the podcast. And in this edition of the podcast, I'm talking about Ben Simmons, who is receiving most of the blame for the Sixers not being in the Eastern Conference Finals right now, because despite the fact that they had a very solid season, finishing first in the Eastern Conference after finishing sixth the year before, and while the regular season was special, the team still failed to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, losing in 7 games in the second round to the Atlanta Hawks. And the person getting the brunt of the blame is all-star forward Ben Simmons, who famously is not good at shooting the basketball. He never takes threes and is only effective scoring at the basket. He is the easiest target, as he did not score in the fourth quarter in any of the last 4 games of the series. It is so obvious who should get most of the blame for the fact that the 76ers are sitting at home right now. I mean, Ben Simmons shot an NBA playoff worst 34% from the free throw line. That's not the worst percentage in this postseason. That's the worst free throw percentage in NBA playoff history. So yes, Ben Simmons deserves a huge amount of the blame for why the 76ers are at home. But I really do wonder if this should change our long-term opinions on him as much as it is right now. I mean, so many people are down on Ben Simmons, talking about the fact that he has the worst contract in the NBA right now. I don't know if a single NBA postseason should change our viewpoints on a player's career. But before I get into all that, I want to go back and look at Ben Simmons' career overall. And he has had an odd career, to say the least. He was a top prospect coming out of LSU. He was drafted first overall, and right out of the gate, Simmons missed his entire rookie season due to injury, but bounced back in a huge way the next year, winning Rookie of the Year. And everyone was talking about how great a player this guy was going to be. There were already those rumors that he's going to end up in LA at some point in his career. I mean, everyone was on the Ben Simmons' bandwagon, and rightfully so. And the best part of Ben Simmons' game is without a doubt his defense. I mean, Ben Simmons is a 2-time All-NBA first-team defender, and in 2020, he led the NBA in steals. And for most of this season, he was considered the front runner for NBA Defensive Player of the Year. And right now, it seems like a lot of people forgot that they had those conversations, because again, we are all on the bandwagon of attacking Ben Simmons. And I understand it. We all do this from time to time. As the media, as fans, we gang up on a guy who is really good at a sport because he's at his weakest moments. And there's a part of me that agrees with the criticism because it's so eye-popping. I mean, there was that one moment where Ben Simmons had a wide open layup and passed the ball this past postseason, and everyone's still talking about that moment. Until Ben Simmons wins a ring with another team or with the Sixers, that's going to be the most career-defining moment of Ben Simmons' career. And that's really bad, but that's what we do. Even if you are a great player, when you have that type of moment, that's what we talk about. I also love this new narrative that Ben Simmons is the worst offensive player in basketball history, because that is simply not the case. For a guy who doesn't have a jump shot, his offensive numbers are not that bad. In 4 seasons with the Sixers, Simmons has averaged 15.9 points per game, 7.7 assists per game, and 8.1 rebounds per game, and Simmons is a 3-time All-Star. But I will say this year felt very different for Ben Simmons and his relationship with the 76ers overall, and I spotted it from the very beginning of the season. All year long, it's been about Joel Embiid, he's the MVP candidate. The 76ers and Doc Rivers made a choice. They chose Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. The problem is they kept Ben Simmons around. He was thought of as a franchise player. This whole season, they treated Ben Simmons like the third best player on the 76ers. Tobias Harris had a bigger offensive role with the 76ers. Their team was in the hands of Joel Embiid. As a franchise, they chose Joel Embiid over Ben Simmons. And that is something I've talked about on this podcast that the 76ers should do. They should choose somebody, because I don't think the duo of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid is ever going to work out. So they made a choice. They said Joel Embiid is our best player without a doubt, and that might be the right choice. The problem is you can't make that choice and then keep Ben Simmons around, because he wasn't playing a big enough role on that offense. His numbers are down by the board. His rebounds, his assists, his points per game. I mean, this narrative that this should all be the fault of Ben Simmons, when throughout most of the season he was looked at as the third wheel on the Philadelphia 76ers. He can't be your main blame in the postseason when he wasn't your main focus during the regular season. The main focus was Joel Embiid. He's the MVP candidate. The 76ers clearly chose Joel Embiid over Ben Simmons, and they should have done the right thing and traded Ben Simmons last offseason when they made that choice. The Sixers did absolutely nothing this past season to help Ben Simmons get better offensively. They reduced his role offensively by bringing in guys like Seth Curry. Seth Curry was taking shots away from Ben Simmons. Tobias Harris played a much bigger role this season with the Sixers than in years past. So I'm not going to look at all of that and take that into account and ignore the fact that Ben Simmons was not playing a big offensive role all season long. So why would I put all of the blame on Ben Simmons? The Philadelphia 76ers are responsible for this. If they had traded Ben Simmons away last offseason, when teams were way more interested than they probably will be this offseason, I think you can make a case that the Philadelphia 76ers would still be in the postseason right now with Joel Embiid as their franchise player. And I also want to state this. I think the 76ers would have been okay making Ben Simmons the face of their franchise. They needed to choose a player. They chose Embiid. The problem is they kept Ben Simmons. That's their major mistake. And let's also put into account head coach Doc Rivers, who has not been to the conference finals since leaving the Boston Celtics. He's blown multiple 3-1 leads in the postseason. This guy is not the elite coach that he used to be. I think if the Sixers were offered James Harden for Ben Simmons, then they should have made that trade, because they might still be in the playoffs right now and not sitting at home. Yes, James Harden might have got injured, but they would have been a better basketball team, because James Harden is a better fit with Embiid than Ben Simmons is. I also want to talk about NBA fans being a prisoner of the moment. I think there are other examples in NBA postseason history where we declare our feelings towards a player and say this is how a player's career is going to go based off of poor postseason performances. And most of the time when we make those declarations, these guys bounce back in a huge way. Remember all those seasons in a row where Kyle Lowry made the postseason with DeMar DeRozan, and both of those guys were not very good in the postseason, especially Kyle Lowry. There was a point where I thought Kyle Lowry was one of the most overrated point guards in the NBA, because he would make the postseason and then he would put up terrible numbers. He was not clutch. He was one of the biggest reasons why the Raptors kept getting sent home. And then all of a sudden, he had one of the best postseasons ever. He's thought of as one of the best Raptors of all time, and he's an NBA champion. I mean, remember how you felt about Kyle Lowry, and think about how you feel about him now. We look at Kyle Lowry and we say he's a clutch player. Just because a player is something in the moment doesn't mean they're not going to change. LeBron is a perfect example. Remember when LeBron lost in the the NBA Finals to Dirk Nowitzki, and we all were on the bandwagon of dissing LeBron James. We all knew he was an all-time great generational talent, but then his game morphed and he became a clutch performer. There were people that thought LeBron James would never win an NBA championship. Now he's won one with 3 different organizations: the Miami Heat, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the LA Lakers. Your feelings towards LeBron back then, you would have never thought that were possible. My point is, your thoughts on a player's career should never be about their lowest moment, because right now Ben Simmons is having his lowest moment he is probably ever going to have. Again, he shot 34% from the free throw line in the postseason. He is getting the brunt of the blame for the 76ers being home right now. He is an easy target, and we're all taking advantage of it, and rightfully so. He deserves a lot of criticism. But if you are down on Ben Simmons to the fact where you now think he's one of the worst contracts in the NBA, I think you are wrong. And how about this? Ben Simmons has only been in the league for 4 seasons. Yes, 5 if you count the year he sat out. Ben Simmons is still 24 years old. You should not be giving up on the career of Ben Simmons based on this one low point of his career, because you might be proven wrong. Remember last season with Paul George, and we all said, oh, playoff P, he's terrible, I'm done with him, he's not a superstar, he's not a max player. Well, guess who's in the Western Conference Finals? Paul George. You should not be judging these players off of their lowest moments. You should be judging on the fact of if they can bounce back or not. I'm not saying Ben Simmons is going to bounce back, but if he does, a lot of you are going to look foolish for giving up on him. I don't think you should give up on him in his lowest moment. Give him a chance to redeem himself. I also think we're all doing exactly what the Philadelphia 76ers want us to do, which is something we should not be doing, making Ben Simmons the scapegoat. Joel Embiid did not help the Sixers get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and neither did Doc Rivers, and they deserve equal blame here. Again, Ben Simmons was the third wheel for most of the regular season. I still think there's a very good chance that Ben Simmons is going to live up to his superstar potential. He is 24 years old. He is probably never going to develop a 3-point shot, but if he can develop any kind of mid-range game, and even at this point it's a big ask, but I still think there's a chance he could greatly improve as an offensive player. Ben Simmons is never going to go out there and average 25 a game. That's not going to be the case, but if he can get back to being the guy who isn't afraid to go to the free throw line, that's the main difference. Forget about the 3-point shot. Ben Simmons is never going to shoot threes. That's not going to happen. That's not his game. I don't even want him to do that. But get to a point where you can shoot 65% from the free throw line, especially during the NBA postseason. If we can get back to that, I would feel great about where Ben Simmons is headed. That's what he needs to do. Forget about all the other stuff, because Doc Rivers isn't going to teach Ben Simmons how to properly shoot the basketball. He can say all he wants that's what's going to happen. Let me tell you right now, that's never going to happen. Ben Simmons is never going to be an adequate 3-point shooter. Ben Simmons is probably never going to be an adequate jump shot. But what Ben Simmons could do is become a good free throw shooter again, because he wasn't this bad before. This is the entire point of this podcast that I'm trying to convey, is I don't think that in this lowest moment you can judge Ben Simmons as a player. He lost total confidence in his game. This doesn't mean that that's going to be Ben Simmons for the rest of his career. LeBron James bounced back from the Dallas Mavericks. That was embarrassing. Remember when JJ Barea was defending LeBron James and getting stops? That didn't interfere with the rest of LeBron's career. that was a moment where LeBron's confidence was shaken. And I know what a lot of you are going to say, Ben Simmons is not LeBron James, but Ben Simmons is better than what we saw in that series versus the Atlanta Hawks. Maybe it was a matchup issue, but I think it came down to confidence. And if Ben Simmons can get that confidence back, he can be a superstar player in the NBA. Ben Simmons is 24 years old. Yes, maybe he shouldn't have a max contract. We can debate about that, but he is far from the worst contract in the NBA, and I still think there are a lot of teams that should be making a trade for Ben Simmons. Here's the first team I thought of, the Chicago Bulls. They definitely need a guy like Ben Simmons to get the ball to Vucevic and Zach LaVine. They need a great passer. They need a great defender. They need a star player. That's the type of move that Billy Donovan and the Bulls should be making, because Billy Donovan seems like the type of guy that could resurrect the career of Ben Simmons. I believe in Billy Donovan as a head coach right now more than I believe in Doc Rivers as a head coach. The Houston Rockets should consider trading for Ben Simmons. They're without James Harden. They're at one of the lowest points in franchise history. They are not a very good basketball team. To get Ben Simmons right now at a lower cost than it would have been last year, because again, they would have had to trade James Harden. Now you can get Ben Simmons for a penny on the dollar. This would be the perfect point for the Houston Rockets to swoop in and steal Ben Simmons away. And how about this one? I think the LA Lakers should be in the market for Ben Simmons, because they need to look at the future of their basketball team without LeBron James, because there's going to be a point where LeBron James is not going to be the same LeBron. And to get Ben Simmons right now with LeBron, who could be his mentor, you have Anthony Davis. Ben Simmons would be a huge upgrade over Dennis Schroeder. Again, the value for Ben Simmons is way down, so the Lakers might be able to swoop in, do a sign and trade like Dennis Schroeder goes to the 76ers and Ben Simmons comes to the Lakers. That move makes a whole ton of sense to me. Ben Simmons as a Laker would probably work out because Frank Vogel is a very good basketball coach. I have faith in Frank Vogel to resurrect the career of Ben Simmons. The Knicks should consider trading for Ben Simmons. I mean, we just saw that Julius Randle is not enough. They need another star player. I think Ben Simmons with Tom Thibodeau would be a great fit. The Timberwolves, they have D'Angelo Russell. They have Karl Anthony Towns. I think they need a guy like Ben Simmons. He's a better defender than what they have. He's a better passer than what they have. And the other team I'll mention is the San Antonio Spurs. Greg Popovich. The Spurs need to make a move. They need to get a good player. Getting Ben Simmons at a time where he's at his lowest makes a whole lot of sense for an organization that's been irrelevant for the last 3 or 4 years. I want the Spurs to go back to being the Spurs, and I think Ben Simmons being coached by Greg Popovich would be a great thing for his career. I have faith in Ben Simmons bouncing back from this, because again, while his confidence might be at an all-time low, I don't think this postseason is going to define the rest of Ben Simmons' career. I know a lot of you feel like Ben Simmons is never going to be the guy you thought he was going to be, and maybe that's the case, but I still think Ben Simmons is a better basketball player than a lot of you are giving him credit for. I think there's a lot left in the tank. To give up on a 24-year-old who is not even in his prime seems like a stupid endeavor, and I will not be a part of it. Do I think the 76ers should be done with Ben Simmons? Absolutely. They should have been done with him last offseason. After they chose Joel Embiid, they should have broke up the band and made Joel Embiid the face of their franchise. And they did that, but again, the problem is they kept Ben Simmons around. He had a reduced role on the 76ers, whether you want to admit that or not. He was not in the same place with the organization all year long. He had a reduced role. His numbers were down from across the board. Ben Simmons needs a change of location, and again, those teams that I mentioned should be after Ben Simmons. The Bulls, the Lakers, the Knicks, the T-Wolves, the Rockets, and the Spurs, they would all be way better basketball teams than they are today if they add Ben Simmons to their roster. All of you can sell your Ben Simmons stock. I'm not off the Ben Simmons bandwagon. I think there can can be redemption. We've seen it before. Like I said, Kyle Lowry was thought of as one of the worst NBA postseason performers of all time because of multiple postseasons. I think Ben Simmons can bounce back from one terrible postseason. And yes, it was terrible. I'm not making excuses. Ben Simmons is the reason the Sixers are at home right now. But if I were a team, I would consider trading for Ben Simmons because I don't think he's that much of a reclamation project. I still believe in Ben Simmons. I think he is a star player, not a superstar player. I really hope he gets to one of those teams that I mentioned because he can't last in Philadelphia. They'll eat him alive there. I don't think he can be on the 76ers roster moving forward. Next year, I am really rooting for a huge bounce back from Ben Simmons because I think a lot of you are being prisoners of the moment, and I have been that before in my life as well. Don't give up on Ben Simmons, the basketball player. I still think he has star potential. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, so please rate, review, and subscribe.